Let's talk about the ergonomics of sewing. It may not even have occurred to you in the past, and I know it hasn't to many home sewers, that setting your sewing machine on top of a table and just having it just like it comes out of the box is not the best way to sew. Ergonomically, it causes you to be sewing up higher than the table. So you're sitting at the table, now your shoulders are up like this, and you're trying to sew, and you're not anywhere near as efficient as you could be if your arms were nice and comfortable with the machine. So that's one reason I would never set my sewing machine up like this and just sew this way. Oh, I know most of you already do, but when you see the difference, and I'm going to show you, I'm sure you're going to want to change that immediately. So first of all, most machines come just like this, but now they're starting to make machines that come with their own extension table. So this machine comes with a nice little handy extension table that just snaps right on, and now I have some work surface. I still have it up on top of a table though, so if this is the way I'm going to sew, this is better than sewing without an extension table. I will need to make adjustments, either an adjustable chair or adjustable table. But I want to be sitting so that I'm comfortable and that my elbows are at a 90-degree angle with this extension table. However, for me, this isn't big enough. Now, if I was making little quilt squares or something, this would probably be fine in the initial piecing, but once I got to the larger piece, I don't have enough surface here to have my project lay flat. And you want your project to lay flat so that it's easier to manage and get nice, clean, straight seams the first time. Nobody likes to rip. We all have to do it from time to time, but this will help eliminate some of those mistakes or little issues you might be having, is if you have that nice flat surface. Now, the next best thing would be to purchase an extension table made specifically for your make and model, made out of plexiglass. And you can see I have one right here. This is giving me more surface. Now I can do an even bigger project with this. Again, want to have my table and my chair at the proper height. So, and not to worry, it doesn't matter how old or how new your machine is. There are companies out there, we'll have them in the resource list for you, that you mail order, you tell them the make and model of your machine, and they automatically cut this extension table to fit right snug up, because it needs to be very flat. That's also key and very important to sewing. So next up, I'm going to show you the absolute best way to sew. Stay tuned. All right, just as I promised, this is what I call the perfect way to sew. I have my machine sunk in a cabinet and flush with the entire surface of this cabinet. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have one of the largest cabinets that they make for home sewing, and it gives me so much surface. There's even a leaf at the back of the machine that comes up. So if I was making a full-length gown or a large quilt, it would all lay completely flat on this surface as I'm sewing. And that's what you want. You don't want the project dragging off the back of the machine or the back of the table and pulling against while you're trying to keep the seam straight or to manipulate what you're doing. You're going to see as I go along how very, very important this is. So again, we can get the extension table that comes with the machine. We can purchase an extension table that's even larger. And if you don't have the wherewithal or the space to have a big cabinet, those are perfectly acceptable as long as you get set up so that the elbows are at a 90-degree angle with the machine. You're going to be able to sew longer and have more fun and be more relaxed. You won't walk away from the machine with a stiff neck or a sore shoulder. So very key. I want to just talk briefly about the machine I'm using, because I'm always asked, what machine are you using? This system will work on any machine, from a treadle all the way to the top of the line, home machine, industrial machine, whatever. It's just the technique of how to hold the fabric and how to handle the project while you're sewing. So any machine will work, but this machine is one of my favorites. It is a light industrial is what they call it. So what it does is it stitches 1,500 stitches a minute. Your average home sewing machine stitches about 800. So it sews a little bit faster. For those of you who want to make money at your sewing, a faster sewing machine is going to help you just a little bit. It also has a stronger thrust, so it'll go through really heavy denims and leathers and other fabrics without balking. It only does a straight stitch, so it can't be in modern sewing your only machine. Because we all know we want to put buttonholes in, we want to use zigzags and other types of stitches that a straight stitch machine can't do for you. But another thing I want to tell you about that I never knew even existed until this machine came out, and that is pin feed in the feed dog. There are 4 different feed dog on this machine, from all the way to lowering them so there's no feed dog working at all the way up to this pin feed. The pin feed, what that does is at the very back of the feed dog, on each side is a tiny little sharp pin that pops up. So if you're sewing on something like velvet that always wants to slide all over the place and has a mind of its own, that will help encourage it to feed through more evenly. So it's just a nice little option to have on a straight stitch machine. And again, if you're going into any type of business or you're already in one, you want a workhorse. And this is a workhorse. It's completely mechanical, it's all metal. All you ever have to do is keep it oiled. It's not going to wear out. You'll have it for the rest of your life. You'll never have to upgrade this machine like you do with some of the home machines. When all the great new gadgets and the great new techniques come out, you want to upgrade, and that's great. But this one will be your nice little workhorse to have at the side. So I want to talk about the feed dog and what the feed dog are doing. And that is so key in sewing. And I don't think most people understand what the feed dog are doing. What they do know is they have to put pins in their fabric in order to get the layers to stay together and to come out even. So for example, if you've ever thought, oh, there's just a long straight seam on a pair of slacks, I'll just throw those in the machine and sew it, I don't want to waste time using pins. What generally happens, or has to happen if you haven't done anything to counteract it, is the feed dog have pulled that bottom layer of the fabric through faster than the top layer. So often you might think, why is the top layer seems to be coming toward me or being a little loose or stretching out? That's not what's happening. What's really happening is the feed dog are taking that bottom layer through a little bit faster than the top. So you put pins in. Well, when you put the pins in, the minute you get to that pin, if you let that pin out, that easing is still happening. So the easing will still happen between the pins. So unless you have your pins every ½ inch, you're still causing some easing between the pins. And that's why sometimes you get a little pin tuck at the pin if you don't pull the pin out and you choose to sew over it. And if you choose to pull it out, then you start letting it go. So the perfect example to really drive that point home is setting a plaid. If you've ever set a plaid, generally what you were taught to do is to go down and pin the different stripes of the plaid together. So let's say that you found every little red stripe and they're about 2 or 3 inches apart, and you pinned each one of those together. You say, okay, it's perfect, both sides, you check it, you put it in the machine, you sew it like you normally do, and then you pull the pins out, and with great trepidation, you open it up to see if they stayed together. And sure enough, the first one's together. You get to the second one, it's starting to be off a little. By the time you get to the third or fourth one, they're completely off. And you're thinking to yourself, why did that happen? I pinned every single one of those. It's because the feed dog are working against you. Now, once you understand the Islander sewing systems, the feed dog will always be working for you because you'll understand exactly what to do to counteract them or to work with them. So that's what's happening with the feed dog versus the presser foot. Now, what I want to do is just show you and have you follow along with me to actually put this into practical use and to really understand how easy it is to hold the fabric, feed it through the machine, and not have to use pins. And again, you actually end up better off because you aren't, the feed dog aren't a mystery to you, and things aren't happening that you don't understand why. Now you understand why that bottom layer ended up shorter than the top layer. Just for an example, for every 9 or 10 inches that you stitch without using any pins or any counteraction to the feed dog, you'll lose approximately 1/4 of an inch off that bottom layer. So I hope I've solved a mystery for you, because I'm sure that's happened to a lot of you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 strips of fabric, 3 inches wide by 36 inches long. It doesn't really matter if it's 35 or 38. It's just all about just practicing these techniques before you try to employ them on a garment. They're deceptively easy, and I'm sure you'll be successful right off the bat. But what I've done is I've started out with both ends completely even together, and I'm going to set them underneath the machine. Now here's the another little thing that I love about this machine, and again, sewing production, making a lot of the same thing, or just sewing custom clothing, you want to be efficient and quick. Watch the foot come up without me touching it. It's because there's a knee lift underneath here, and all I have to do is push my knee and the foot comes up for me and back down. So my hands never have to leave the fabric, and it really comes in handy for turning corners. If your machine does not automatically stop with the needle down, please set it to stop with the needle down. It will make all the difference in keeping your seams straight. And I'll explain that as we go along. So I'm going to put this underneath the foot, and I'm going to start ahead of the raw edge and put my needle down. This seam I'm going to stitch at 1/4 of an inch. And I've started ahead of the raw edge for a couple of reasons. The first reason is we do something that we call back tacking. There's lots of different terms for this, reverse stitching, there's any number of them. But basically what that does is it holds that seam from popping out while you're attaching it to the next piece of the garment. So, and other areas that you'll want to back stitch or back tack in is just to, if it's a possible stress point, you just want to ensure that it doesn't come undone. Now, when I was younger, I used to think, well, if I back stitch once, that's good, maybe 2, 3 times back and forth, that'll even be better. Actually, no, that's counterproductive, because what happens when you go back and forth 3 or 4 times, now you've put more thread into the area than there should be, and actually what you've done is cause a stress point. So once or twice over, twice over is perfectly sufficient. So I've started forward, I'm going to back up to the edge and then come forward. So I've definitely secured the end, but I haven't put too much thread there. The other reason you want to start forward, if you're sewing with a home sewing machine that has a very wide hole in the throat plate for the needle to pass through, it's usually a slot because your machine zigzags. It needs to have that wider opening. Well, that can be very problematic when you're sewing on fine fabric. It can get sucked down in that hole, and I know most of you have experienced that at least once, where it gets sucked down in there and it can actually destroy the edge of your fabric when that happens. So to avoid that, this also helps. But furthermore, the best way to do it is to use a straight stitch throat plate in your machine. A lot of the machines have them available, you just have to purchase them separately. So when you purchase your machine, you might want to ask, I need a straight stitch throat plate as well. They set right in there, and all there is just a hole just slightly larger than the needle for the needle to pass through. The fabric cannot possibly get sucked down in there. All right, let's get started with the technique of how to sew without pins. All right, I'm going to make sure, and you're going to practice this too. So I'm going to make sure that both ends of this fabric are even, and I'm going to take a hold of the fabric at about the edge of the table with my thumb under, my fingers on top. I'm going to repeat this so many times you won't be able to forget it. Thumb under, fingers on top, tilt it about a 90-degree angle toward the sewing machine. Do not let the fabric slide between your thumb and your finger. You want to hold this. This is your pin. This is your only pin, your finger and your thumb right here. By tilting it toward the machine at this 90-degree angle, you have disallowed the bottom layer from going through faster than the top. It's as simple as that. Now you'll take your left hand and put your fingers, the pads of your fingers, down on the fabric here. These two hands are going to work together, and that's the whole secret of the system. So these two hands work together. This hand, the left hand, is putting a slight amount of pressure, depending on the loft of the fabric, a slight amount of pressure to keep the two layers from sliding back and forth and getting out of alignment, and also to help guide the seam allowance. So this is my only pin, this is my guide. And then it doesn't matter what stitch length or what speed you stitch this at, I'm going to work with these two hands together. Well, wait a minute, let me back up first. So I'm going to back up a few stitches to the end, come forward, stop with the needle down, adjust. Now, in garments, you're going to have notches, so you'll go find the notch and match that, and that's where you'll put your hand. But in this case, we don't have any notches. We just want to always make sure we're keeping it even. All right, so here we go. I'm going to stitch right up to, and you see how my hands are, the fabric's not sliding between my hands. I stop here. This hand never passes the needle. And I know many of you sew like this, and you pull this through. First of all, this is after the fact, so I kind of try to remind you that you're too late if you're back here pulling it through. And secondly, the feed dog are what pulls the fabric through the machine. You don't need to do that. Third, you are causing yourself all kinds of back and forth motion that can cause stress, rather than just sitting up straight and calmly sewing. So don't try to break that habit. If you've been sewing for 30 years, I know it's going to be hard to break that habit. But I can tell you right now, every person I know who has broken the habit is thrilled with how much easier and more comfortable it is to sew. So we're going to sew this thing right together. And I'm going to just keep coming back, making sure that my fabric's together. Sew my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And sure enough, you'll find out that you'll come out even at the end. And when I get to the very end, depending on the loft of the fabric, there's still a distance here, and I can't hold on to that fabric the same way anymore. So I might just put my fingers down and hold those together as I get to the end. Back up. And there's that knee lift. I don't have to even move my hands. And now I have that strip sewn together, and it's matching at both ends. All right, now the next thing I want to show you is a little exercise. You're not generally going to have to do something like what I'm just about to have you do, but it will drive home the point about the feed dog. So I have 2 strips of fabric that are exactly the same length. I'm going to cut 1 inch off of, or approximately 1 inch. It doesn't have to be an exact measurement, but cut one down by about 1 inch. I'm going to tell you the rule about the feed dog. Because the feed dog are easing in, the best thing to remember is what piece goes against a feed dog. And you're probably thinking, what is she talking about? You just sew it, right? Doesn't matter which piece goes against a feed dog. Yes, it does. Because of that feed dog action, we always want to remember to put against the feed dog the longest, the loosest, the slipperiest, the most difficult to handle, the most bias will go against the feed dog. Because the feed dog do that easing, it will actually help us sew a better seam and sew 2 pieces together that might not be exactly the same. Now in this case, these were the same, but now we've made them different by making one longer than the other. So which one goes against the feed dog? The longest. Okay, so we're going to have these come out even at both ends by using the feed dog this time instead of counteracting it. So we're going to start out the same way. Back up to the edge, come forward, stop with the needle down. Now, here's the thing I want you to do is kind of guesstimate and try to even out the amount you're going to ease in a section. So in other words, I'm going to try and come up with about 50% here, and then kind of 1/4 this off right here so that I've got about the same amount of ease. If you want to take a tape measure and mark those different sections, that's good too. But for this purpose, it really isn't all that important. But I want you to hang on to this section very tightly and just stitch it like we did before. Remember that left hand never leaves, passes the needle, and the right hand is grabbing it thumb under, fingers on top, and then tip toward the machine. All right, and then away we go. And back again, I'll find another place. And don't worry, I'm not judging the fact of whether you've got the exact amount of ease in one section or the other. Moreover, it's just trying to drive home the point of what the feed dog are doing and how you can tame those feed dog to do what you want them to do instead of fighting with them like you may have in the past. So we'll get this last little section in here. Now what you'll see is that when we turn this over, you'll see how this is all rippled on this side. That's because we eased all of that in. We eased a whole inch in a 36-inch seam. And this is what's happening, not quite to this degree, if you're not using pins and you're just trying to sew your seams together. And then you can well imagine what that's going to look like when you press it out. Let's say this is the side seam of a pan. So the front's going to hang nice and straight and the back's going to be all rippled up next to it. And some students, it wouldn't be this rippled, but it'd be slightly rippled. And some students will say to me, oh yeah, but you can just press that out. No, you cannot. You can't press it out because, especially if it's a firmly woven fabric, I guess with wool you could, because if you put enough steam on wool, you can stretch it out. But for a normal fabric, you don't want to stretch it back out. If you didn't stitch it right in the first place, you want to go back and restitch it properly. So no, you can't steam that out. But if you've done this exercise, now you understand what those feed dog are doing, and it's really going to impact as we go forward, your understanding of that. Now I'm going to do one more thing with the strips that I would invite you to do, and that is to cross seams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a couple sections of this apart. And you know, there's lots of places, like say on an underarm seam, where you need the seams, you want the seams to match up evenly. And you can even do that without pins or basting. Obviously, what you've probably done in the past, and you would press this seam, and I'm just going to finger press it here for you, rather than make you wait for me to go find an iron and iron it. But obviously, if I'm making a garment, I'm going to have those seams pressed really nicely. But for this exercise, I'm going to have one seam folded to the left, the other seam folded to the right, lay them right on top of each other. We come in here, and we're going to sew this just like we did before. I'm going to make sure those seams are nice and tight and close there. I'm going to hold on to that bottom layer so it doesn't go through faster than the top. And there you have it. Cross seams, and they came out, and there was no pins. Now, on certain fabrics, I'll even stick a pin in there myself, but it would have to be like a really slippery silk or rayon that's just going to shift a little bit too much on me. So in some cases, especially if you don't sew every day or you don't sew for a living, you may still employ a few pins. But what I know is you'll be able to employ far less pins, and you won't have some of the difficulty you had in the past thinking, I'm using the pins, they're going to save me, and then you end up having difficulty anyway. Now you'll understand the feed dog versus the presser foot, and you'll be able to sew just like I did, very comfortably. And again, you see I'm sitting here very comfortable. and able to do that so easily that all of a sudden you think, wow, sewing's not as much work as I thought it was. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy those. Please practice those right away so that you can get started with the system.